Interesting. So with that said, the Cantos, week 7 of 8 in our second run at it, and your host is Andrew Schelling. Andrew, it's all yours.
Thank you, Paul. Hello there, everybody. I see Roxy is not with us and Matteo, but I know Roxy said she's off to a poetry reading or something of her own. I looked with some amusement at an outfit that is offering these online courses on various poets. Sylvia Plath they had, and Emily Dickinson, and these are 5-week courses. And here we are, 15 out of 16 weeks into the Cantos, and I feel like we're only scratching the surface. We're only halfway through the book, and there's a lot more. But what a big project. So I want to commend all of you and thank you for being so present and attentive, and sticking with this great big mountain range of a book. Yeah, Paul.
Could you ever do the Maximus poems by Charles Olson? Would that be something that you'd be comfortable doing?
We should talk about that. I wouldn't want to commit right now, but we could talk about that. Sure.
All right. Fair enough.
Good. I was going to mention that, just obliquely in a moment. I thought I would open today by acknowledging that in the last really month and a couple of days, 2 poets who, for me personally, bear enormously on the Cantos have died. And I wanted to not only acknowledge them, but acknowledge sort of their work and give a little glimpse of the ongoing ripple effects of that big book of Ezra Pound's. The first poet, February 24th, Lynn Haginian died. And she had been for a time my neighbor. She lived practically around the corner from me and was a friend and neighborly presence, as well as one of the high profile figures in language poetry. At the time that I knew her, she had been doing a lot of publishing as well as writing poetry, and she did a series of chapbooks under the imprint Tumba Press, and she produced them in her own house. Lynn Haginian, that's Hejinian, one of the, I guess you could say, high profile poets that were associated with the language poetry movement. And she did for 8 years this series called, Tumba Press, these chapbooks. This is the final one, which is her book. She did 3 of her own titles, books by everybody from Alice Notley and Clayton Eshelman to most of her compatriots in the language poetry movement, including Ron Silliman, Carla Harriman, Kit Robinson, Clark Coolidge, Michael Palmer, people like that. And she did 50 of these books. And when she ended up ending the series at 50, she then sold her platen press, an old Chandler and Price cast iron platen press. It moves like a clamshell, and weighed about as much as a Volkswagen weighs. She sold it to a guy named David Scheidlauer down in Oakland. And I was at the time with a friend, Benjamin Friedlander, editing, we were co-editing something of a poetics journal that we called Jimmy and Lucy's House of K. And we decided that we would do a tribute to Tumba Press. So we put together in 1986 an issue of our very rough journal dedicated to Lynn's work and Tumba Press. And it opens with an interview I did with Lynn. And I'm going to just read a tiny bit of the opening question. Remember, I was approaching her as somebody who had published for her community a set of 50 chapbooks by a multiplicity of authors. And to put this just a slight bit into context, the last line of the final book in her series, which is her own book, The Guard, the final line of her poem says, "This is the difference between language and paradise." And she put paradise in quote marks. This is the difference between language and paradise. So I opened the interview with her saying, it's a staggering moment in poetry when you come upon Ezra Pound saying, in my copy of the Cantos, it occurs on the final page, "I have tried to write paradise." There's a grievous resignation and an admission of failure that seems to implicate the whole history of the 20th century. A lot of scholars haven't gotten past that moment and are busy trying to salvage some fragment of paradise from the cantos. Meanwhile, you, Lynn, have published at 2-month intervals 50 pieces of writing by people who seem united in their efforts to discover just what can and what can't be done by writing. The whole procedure of composition is getting looked at here. And since Tumba titles came out as a serial project rather than as isolated books, they tend to get read in the context of one another. In a curious way, they form an 8 years cantos, written not by one individual, but by a cohesive group of writers. I say the project closes with your own book, The Guard. Its last line, which is the final line to this 8-year output, seems a direct response to Pound. This is the difference between language and paradise. Is this a deliberate gesture to bring things back round to Pound? Embedding paradise in quotation marks emphasizes its nounness as well as its tragic lack of significance for the contemporary world. I was at the time thinking that line we read several weeks ago in the piece on Cantos, where Pound says, "I don't know how humanity stands it," with a painted paradise at the end of it, without a painted paradise at the end of it. And I found when Lynn Haginian put quote marks around paradise, that was the equivalent of Ezra Pound's calling it a painted paradise. She responded, or maybe even retorted, you could say, "It is absurd, I think, to want to write paradise. Absurd of me or of Ezra Pound." And that really is what the quotation marks enclosing the word are meant to indicate. The terms language and paradise are mutually exclusive. And so, to some extent, your characterization of Pound's statement may be applicable to my own this, i.e., my poem, or if not the poem, then the descriptive language just preceding it. This is the difference between language and poetry. It does hint at resignation and a failure of sort, but I certainly would not want to romanticize my position by pretending to have finished the Tumba project with a tragic flourish, or to suggest that the difference between language and paradise is demoralizing or debilitating. Well, this is something that, I've thought of a great deal is, I'm going to say a few other things about it, but the fact that the Tumba chapbooks are 50 little books. I have a handful of them here. Lynn's The Guard, Charles Bernstein, Clark Coolidge, Carla Harriman, Michael Palmer, Alice Notley. It felt to me like you could almost see these as 50 cantos that formed an ideogram of a particular moment in poetry history, or really not so much a moment as 8 years. Anyhow, that's for Lynn. The other poet who died, some of you may have known personally, but most of you would have known his work probably, Jerome Rothenberg, who was not only a poet, but a translator and a fabulous anthology maker, builder. And I wanted to acknowledge it because he was not only a friend, in many ways a colleague, but a hugely important influence on me. And it was his 1973 anthology, America Prophecy, which is the first place I encountered Ezra Pound. Um, this book is actually, it's quite a large book. It's 550 pages altogether, but it's tracked through by the influence of both Ezra Pound and the Cantos, as well as many other poets. I just counted shortly ago, there are more than 10 entries for Pound in America Prophecy, including 4 cantos entire. So the first 4 cantos I ever read were in that anthology, and they're not in a chronological order. Rothenberg has arranged his book as an anthology, as the subtitle says, a new reading of American poetry from pre-Columbian times to the present. And this was, in a sense, an effort to, first of all, overturn English departments as the holders of poetry. Second of all, it was meant to overturn the sense that American poetry just happens in English. This was, as it says, pre-Columbian times of the present. So you have Aztec glyphs in it, you have Native American, almost like hieroglyphic-like texts. There's material translated from Spanish and Chinese, as well as the native tongues. It was a place where many of us probably first encountered translators like Francis Densmore, who translated maybe 30 or 40 different native languages into haiku-like poetry. And all the poets of the 60s, 50s, 60s really appear there, as well as deep into history. And I've often thought that this is the closest book I know of to the Cantos. It too is a real ideogram of what American poetry not just would look like, but could look like. Um, in 1973, when it was published, you look at the book now and it feels quite outdated. We're 50 years down the road. An enormous amount has happened in poetry since, but I still feel like I would characterize it as an ideogram, and like the Tomba books, a composite made by many people's voices, which in a sense is really what the cantos themselves are. I mean, we've talked about how much translation there is in it, how many letters are in it, how many conversations, how many memories told by Pound or by his friends, the enormous range of poets from Homer and Catullus and Propertius, up through Arnaud Daniel and Cavalcanti and Dante, up through Villon. We've got T.S. Eliot in it. We've got William Carlos Williams in it. We've got H.D. repeatedly showing up in the cantos. So in some senses, it too is an ideogram of fragments that Ezra Pound has pulled together. And then I want to say another thing. There have been a lot of post-cantos long poems in the American language, way too many to count. I mean, hundreds of them. It, really has become an American tradition to write long poems. Very few of them have the variety of surface texture and variety of composition methods that the cantos have, let alone something like the Tomba series or America Prophecy. But I was sort of thinking of that even Lynn Haginian, who wrote book-length poems, and Jerome Rothenberg, who wrote book-length poems, their poems have a unified surface texture. They do not have that quality that you find in the cantos, where from one canto to another, the voice changes, the composition style changes, the material going into it changes, the focus changes. So I was just, jotting a few things down. You could say that HD's book length poems have a uniform surface texture. T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets has a uniform surface texture. I think even Williams Patterson, despite the larding in of lyric poems and newspaper clippings and letters, feels to me much more of a unified surface. And then I think of older contemporary poets now, like Nathaniel Mackey. You can read 1,000 pages of his Song of the Andambulu, and it's very, very hard to see the difference of one song from another. The surface texture really doesn't change. Um, Rachel Duplessis, her drafts, which is named out of, if not an homage, maybe an ironic calling attention to Pound's drafts and fragments. But even her drafts often have, to my mind, a very uniform surface texture. Um, that's one thing to pay attention to. I offer, just off the top of my head, maybe Robert Duncan's Passages as a poem that has the multiple surface textures that you get in the cantos. I think Olson's Maximus does. I think Gary Snyder's Mountains and Rivers Without End. But, again, to go back to just that quality of the cantos as being an ideogram made out of very different material. And that's what I was really thinking about with the death of Lynn Heginian and Jerome Rothenberg, the way they both, wittingly or unwittingly, built ideograms of their moment in poetry as Ezra Pound did. Paul, I see you have a hand up.
Andrew, go a little more deeply into that if you'd be so kind, as to the different tones in Pound as opposed to all the examples that you gave. What appeals to you about that? Tell us what qualities that kind of work has, or why it's important for you to point that out.
Well, very specifically, Paul, I would say I don't get bored. I don't get stuck in one tone of voice. I don't get stuck in one perspective. I don't get stuck in one aesthetic or one take. As soon as I start to get impatient with the economics, suddenly we're having a vision of Kwannon or Greek goddesses. As soon as I start to get impatient of that, suddenly we're wandering the roads of southern France. And stylistically, the poem keeps changing. And even the surface texture of the multiple languages, it's easy to get frustrated or impatient with them, but they do break the surface of the ground of it. So you don't feel like you're on a treadmill, but you're constantly negotiating an active terrain.
Do you think there's something formulaic when poets don't write with that multiplicity of tones?
I wouldn't want to judge anybody that way. I think everybody has their own, quality. And I certainly am very sympathetic to people who find a method and then they can just plug in and go with it. It's not how I write, but I understand that there are people who do that. And I think for Lynn Heginian's generation, and a big term was method. It was like poets wanted to find their method. It wasn't their voice. It wasn't the Tao, it was their method. And so I find a lot of the language poetry to have this uniform surface because once a particular method is arrived at, and in some senses, the overheated nature of Ezra Pound's mind made him keep changing. The voices change, the material changes, the focus changes. And that's something I find really refreshing from the kind of Anglo-Saxon rhythm of Canto 1 that's a translation of Homer to, the grumpy vernacular, Cracker Barrel, Idaho born, I mean, it turns on a dime often. And in the piece on cantos, it's turning, between lines, even in the middle of a line, it turns. And I personally find that really engaging, and it keeps me from, I may get lost, but I don't get bored.
That's great.
anyhow, I wanted to bring forward those two, kind of strange long poems and, point out that even though Pound called the Cantos an epic, it's not an epic like Homer is or Dante is, which has a plan and a story and, more or less a singular voice moving through. Pound has multiple voices. It's not really his poem any more than it is Homer's or Dante's or Ovid's. And then the other thing is that the great risk, and it was just a preposterous risk that Pound took, which was then picked up, Paul, very much by Charles Olson, was can you write a poem going forward into history that notates history but doesn't predict it or try to explain it, but just stays with it. And these 50 years of Ezra Pound, or 50, really more like 55, almost 60 years that he was at work in some form or another on the Cantos, were hugely tumultuous times coming out of World War One, going through the great struggles of socialism, communism, capitalism, and then World War II blowing things apart, and changes in media, changes in technology, changes in economy, changes in um, geographical boundaries, country names, the whole thing. Uh, so that's where what we have been looking at here with this complex book.
Roxy, Roxy pointed something out in the chat asking about where Bernadette Mayer fits into this Methodist voice, she says, not to be confused with a religion in your thinking.
Um, well, complexly, I think the language poets really looked at Bernadette as they looked at New York school poets for the pioneering of a lot of new methods. And a famous document was a list of writing possibilities that Bernadette Mayer had come up with and published. She probably used them at the Poetry Project or something. And there was a severe critique of that by Barrett Watton, who felt that the problem with Bernadette's list was that it suggested that all types of writing are equivalent. If any of you know Barrett Watton, he's a very hierarchical and authoritarian, I might say, person. And I think he found the anti-hierarchy and the anarchist possibilities of Bernadette's list problematic. But I would say Bernadette herself very much, with big projects like Memory or studying hunger or some of these things. These were like finding a method and going with it. Midwinter's Day is all the writing she could do in sort of a 24-hour period. And that's a very, very different approach to time than Pound. Let's see, Roxy, I was going to say Barrett has a severe critique of many things. Yes, Barrett does indeed. So I don't want to advocate any of these things as right or wrong, but it is sort of amusing to watch them. And, I sort of felt like Bernadette Mayer's list was like a wasp's nest lobbed into the world of language poetry. And Barrett Watton picked it up to lob it back, but he got stung in the interim. So
Andrew, I'm trying to remember you telling that story about Duncan and Barrett Watton. Were you at that reading when Duncan chased him off the stage?
no, I wasn't. No.
Oh, okay.
I have a few friends who were, so I got, secondhand reports, but yeah. But yeah, that was again one of these sort of American poetry war situations. Yeah. But it did have to do, I think, with not so much authoritarianism as reductionism, was what Duncan was objecting to with Barrett Watton. He thought he was reducing Zhukovsky to a kind of, Marxist critique of history and poetry. And I think for Duncan, Marxism is there, but it's much bigger than that. And just in the same way we could say with the Cantos, the economics of Pound are there, but what's going on is much bigger than the economics, whatever Pound thinks he may be doing. And that's one of the fascinations for me of anybody, is when it exceeds what their project is or their method is. And that may be why I often get bored with, certain longer poems, is because the method presumes something and then you never get outside of that presumption. You're always brought back inside of it.
Could you say a little bit more about I may get lost, but I never get bored? Could you complete that statement a little more? Thank you.
Well, what I would say is, rather than completing the statement, I would make a suggestion, which is read Cantos 52 to 61, the Chinese dynasties. And I often don't, I don't know who any of the characters are except the occasional, Confucius shows up or Genghis Khan, but there's dozens of names and you're just whipping through history at breakneck speed. But the language is so, I don't know what it is. I still don't have an explanation for it. I think there's something magical about Pound's understanding of vowels and consonants. And I can just close my eyes in a sense and read on through. And, I don't get bored. That's all I can say.
I guess that's a good way to be.
Yeah, give it a try. I'd be curious.
My-
Report to us next
My,
week.
my wife says I told her that if she stuck with me, she'd never be bored. And we've been together 40 years and I keep her moving, I think.
That's good to hear. Excellent, Stanley.
Andrew, one last thing. I know you took a big breath and you were ready to crank into it, but is this the Bernadette thing that you were talking about here?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, there it is. The writing experiments.
I dropped it in the chat so people can see it at their convenience. It's on the Penn website.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Paul. That's good to have available there. Yeah. I want to see if we can get through some of these Pisan cantos now. Back to the Pisan cantos and the true crisis and the true mother lode of this huge book. We've already heard what for a while was the last line of the cantos, or not the last line, but the last little fragment which began, I have tried to write paradise. That particular fragment was displaced and is now the third to last fragment at the end of the book rather than the final one. But for about 20 printings of the book, it showed up as the final one. But I'd like to go to page my book 464, 484, Paul, in the PDF of it here, Canto 77.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah, page 484 of the PDF.
Okay, this is going to take me just a minute because I didn't have it up. And
That's fine, yeah.
this is going to take just a second here. Let me go through my process and complicate.
Actually, if you can get to 496 instead, that's just as good.
Okay. Just one second. If I go to open recent, it's not there. So just a moment. Here we go. Okay. Did you say 497?
Actually, go to 484. Yeah, I think we'll start at the beginning and just take a quick look at the beginning of this. This is a
Okay.
canto we'll just
Okay, so I have, let me just bump it up a little bit here in size and share screen. And is this where you'd like us to be, right here?
Yeah, good.
Okay, good.
So remember that Ezra Pound is sitting in the tiger cage, or, anyhow, considering himself on death row. And he has the audacity to open Canto 77 with a touch of humor. And this day Abner lifted a shovel instead of watching it to see if it would take action. Now, notice the skate as we change tones. Von Tirpitz said to his daughter, as we have elsewhere recorded, he said, beware of their charm. But on the other hand, Moksh thought he would do me a favor by getting me onto the commission to inspect the mass graves at Katyn. The beau monde gouverne, if not toujours, at any rate, is a level of some sort where two things tend to return chung in the middle, whether upright or horizontal. And having got him, advantages, privilege, there is nothing, italics, nothing they will not do to retain him. Yours truly, Kung Fu Tzu. Notice how Pound again has the audacity to cite Confucius, but turn him into like a kind of modern sounding politician. There is nothing, italics, nothing they will not do to retain him. Entered the brothers Watson store in Clinton, New York, preceded by a crash, i.e. by a huge gripsack or satchel, which fell and skidded along the 20-foot aisleway and ceased with a rumpus of glassware, unbreakable as it proved, and with the inquiry, what is a comin'? I'll tell you what is a comin'. Socialism is a comin'. AD 1904, somewhat previous, but effective for immediate scope. Things have ends or scopes and beginnings. To know what precedes and what follows will assist your comprehension of process. Vide also Epictetus and Cirrus. As Arcturus passes over my smoke hole, the excess electric illumination is now focused on the bloke who stole a safe he couldn't open. I take that to mean that probably what happened is they finally removed the Klieg lights from shining on Ezra Pound and put it on this GI, now an internee, who stole a safe. And then notice what he does. Interlude entitled Periplum by Camion and Awoi's Henia. That's a spirit out of the old no plays of Japan. And Awoi's Henna plays Hob in the tent flaps. Kalak through, making rain. Ooh, 2, 7. Ooh, Derim Baluba Fossa. 4 times was the city remade. Now in the heart indestructible. 4 gates, the 4 towers, Il Sirocco, A Geloso. Men rose out of Thonos, out of the earth, Agata, Ghana, Scylla, and Mount Tishon is faint as the wraith of my first friend who comes talking ceramics. Mist glaze over the mountains. How is it far if you think of it? Came Boreas and his kiln to break the corporal's heart. Bright dawn on the shithouse next day with the shadow of the gibbet's attendant. And peace on clouds are undoubtedly various and splendid as any I have seen since at Scudder's Falls on the Schuylkill, by which stream I seem to recall a feller sitting in a rudimentary shack doing nothing, not fishing, just watching the water. A man of about 45. Nothing counts save the quality of the affection. Let's pause there and move forward to 496, Paul. You've noticed now this enormous introduction of Chinese characters all of a sudden. And look what at the end of the canto Pound has done, knowing that many people are going to have a hard time figuring out what he's doing. Scroll back up to the top of that one page there, Paul. We had the first ideogram middle, and there it was, chung. And then we had knowing what comes before and what comes after. And we had the next two ideograms, precede and follow. And then we had a citation from Confucian, how is it far if you think of it? This was a line Pound loved, and he gets the Chinese in, how is it far? And then we've got dawn over the shit house, dawn, and so on. Notice number 6, mouth, and right across from it, what would be, well, we've got Pound's translation of an ideogram, by gosh. I mean, he's actually having a lot of fun here, I think. For a guy on death row, he's putting in a lot of jokes and a lot of just sort of fun vernacular and various things. But I just wanted to show you that for that particular canto where he's really introducing these Chinese characters, he felt that it would be worthwhile having a little glossary at the end of it. And it's the one place he really does this in the cantos. And just to point that out, we're not going to look any further at that canto, which is well worth reading, but we will run out of time if we do. So Paul, let's scroll down and start the next canto, 78. And
I think before we launch into it, Matt raised his hand.
oh, okay, sure. Matt, yeah.
Well, one of the things I noticed when reading that canto is that the second column there of the ideograms read almost like a poem themselves on earlier in the page when they're just kind of lining down the page,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like not one's own spirit and sacrifice is flattery.
By gosh.
By gosh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and that comes straight out of Confucius too. I'm glad you pointed that out. And one thing that we scrolled over and didn't look at is he's actually laid in some Arabic lettering too in similarly large letters, but we don't need to go back and look at that. But it's the name of a poet, Ferdushi, that Basil Bunting had inscribed on his door. But let's go now to Canto 78 here. And this is a particularly interesting canto because it's going to have, just to prepare you a little bit, among the things that are going to happen are a recollection of Ezra Pound's 400-mile walk from Rome to Gais to visit his daughter in the waning days of the war. It's also going to end with certain kind of vision, I think. I want to look at that rather closely, but let's just read through this now. By the square elm of Ida, 40 geese are assembled. Little sister who could dance on a saxpence to arrange a pax mundi, sobrun zekian, that sort of means on top of a zekian or a sixpence. Cassandra, your eyes are like tigers with no word written in them. Isn't that a little bit like Lynn Heginian's line, this is the difference between language and paradise, or even Ezra Pound's, I have tried to write paradise. Cassandra, your eyes are like tigers with no word written in them. Be aware, remember, whenever cats show up, something starts to happen in the cantos. They're Ezra Pound's spirit animals, I guess you could say. You also have I carried to nowhere, to an ill house, and there is no end to the journey. The chessboard too lucid, the squares are too even. Theater of war. Theater is good. There are those who did not want it to come to an end. Most of you here are old enough to remember that that word theater of war, which came out of World War II, was still being used during the Vietnam War. And here's this, sort of remarkable just vision of the idiocy of it. Theater is good. There are those who did not want it to come to an end. And those Negroes by the clothesline are extraordinarily like the figures del Cosa. Their green does not swear at the landscape. 2 months' life in 4 colors, ter flabiliter itin, to close the temple of Janus Bifronte, that's the two-faced Janus, the two-faced bastard, and the economic war has begun. Napoleon was a good man. It took us 20 years to quaff him, and it will not take us 20 years to quaff Mussolini, as was remarked in Via Barbeau by the Imperial Chemicals, its brother. Firms failed as far off as Avignon. My red leather notebook. Pax Medicia by his own talk in Naples. Lorenzo, who left lyrics in opera that men sing to this day. Alla terra abbandonata, the abandoned earth, alla terra abbandonata, followed him Metastasio, alla non della in il programma di Verona. The old hand is stylus, still holding its cunning. And the water flowing away from that side of the lake is silent as never at Sirmio, under the arches, Foresteria, Salo, Gardone, to dream the Republic. San Sepolcro, the 4 bishops in metal, lapped by the flame amid ruin, La Fede, reliquaries seen on the altar. Someone to take the blame if we slip up on it. Girdle's sleek head in the midst of it. The man out of Naxos past Fara Sabina. If you will stay for the night. Now, here's this moment where we're just suddenly going into his memory of this 400-mile foot journey he made from Rome to Gaius in the Tyrol to see his daughter. If you will stay for the night, it is true there's only one room for the lot of us. Money is nothing. No, there's nothing to pay for that bread, nor for the minestra. That's like minestrone soup, nor for the minestra. Nothing left here but women. Have lugged it this far, we'll keep it. Il zaino is an Italian sort of slang for the backpack. No, they will do nothing to you. Who says he is an American? A still form on the Branda, Bologna, Grüß Gott, der Tatilius gekommen, slow lift of long banners, Roma profugens sabinorum interas, and belt the city choir of nobile fame. The Latin people taken has their name, bringing his gods into Latium, saving the bric-a-brac. Here he his goddess brocht in Latio, each one in the name. And whom are the voices keeping hands on the reins? I think that idea of, bringing his gods into Latium is like a rhyme with Ezra Pound himself. He's trying in his book to bring in the names of his gods. In whom are the voices keeping hand on the reins? Gaudier's word, not blacked out. This is Pound bringing in his gods into Latium, his friend Gaudier, who died in the trenches of World War I. Gaudier's word not blacked out, nor old Hume's, nor Wyndham's. These are 2 of Pound's friends. Wyndham Lewis, the sculptor and writer, or painter and writer, and Hume, one of his old Imagist companions. Mana Aboda, the touch of sadism in the back of his neck, tinting justice. Steele, that is one awful name, said the cheerful, reflective nigger, blood and slaughter to help him, dialogue repartee at the drain hole. sorry for the now forbidden word, but I think there's, a bit of a joke in this that somebody's saying steal, that is one awful name. And meanwhile, there's two other guys named Blood and Slaughter who are talking with him at the as they do whatever they do at the drain hole. Straight as the bar of a ducking stool, got his pride. Get to the States, you can buy it. Don't try that here. The bearded owl making cat calls. Palace, and this next word means justice. Palace, justice, sustain me. Definition cannot be shut down under a box lid. But if the gelatin be effaced, whereon is the record? Wherein is no responsible person having a front name, a hind name, and an address. Not a right, but a duty. Those words still stand uncancelled. Presente and merda for the monopolists, the bastardly lot of them. Put down the slave trade, made the desert to yield, menaced the lone swine, Sicalctus, double Sitalcus, not the priest but the victim, said Allen upward, knew something was phony when he, Pellegrini, said, money is there. Knowledge lost with Justinian and with Titus and Antonius. Law rules the sea, meaning lex rodi, the law of roads. Not the state have vantage from private misfortune. No, or the story of property to Rostovtsev. Is it Rostovtsev? Nothing worse than fixed charge, several years average. Mencius 3, 1, Tang 1, Kung, chapter 3 and verse 7. Be welcome, O cricket, my grillo, but you must not sing after taps. Notice again how quickly the texture changes here. We just moved from a discussion of the economics with somebody who Pound's not even sure, Rostovtsev, nothing worse than fixed charge, several years average. And then suddenly we're into Mencius 3, 1 Tang, 1 Kung, chapter 3 and verse 7. And then suddenly he hears a cricket as his tent flaps. Be welcome, O cricket, my grillo. Grillo is an Italian word for cricket. Be welcome, O cricket, my grillo. But you must not sing after taps. Guard's cap, quattrocento. On dit quelquefois un viage qu'un casque ne sert pour rien de tout. Cela ne sert que pour donner courage et ceux qui n'en ont pas de tout, which means something like, it is said in the village that a helmet is no use, none at all, only good to give courage to those who have none. This must be something he heard in the countryside as he was walking up through somewhere, So Salzburg reopens. Chi suono Wolfgang Grillo. Here sings, that's Chi suono, here sings Wolfgang Grillo, Wolfgang the cricket. P. Viola da Gamba, one might do worse than open a pub on Lake Garda. So one thinks of Tarhada and Willie, Gautier Villars, and of Monkel and La Volonnie on Casque de Cristal Rose, Les Baladines, with the cake shops in the Nevsky, and Sirdar, Armenonville, or the Kashmiri houseboats on Casque de Cristal, Rose, Les Baladines, messed up Monsieur Mozart's house, but left the door of the new concert hall. So we said, looking at the signed columns in San Zeno, how the hell can we get any architecture when we order our columns by the gross? Little gloss on that San Zeno column we had much earlier, where we had the little Latin Adam me fecit, made by Adam, which Pound had seen at San Zeno in a column, and he was so impressed that The craftsman took so much pride prior to the ages of usury. The craftsman took so much pride in the column he built for this cathedral that he signed it. So he said, looking at the signed columns in San Zeno, how the hell can we get any architecture when we order our columns by the gross? Red marble with a stone loop cast round it, 4 shafts, and Farinata kneeling in the cortile, built like Ubaldo, that's race. Cangrande's grin like Tommy Cochran's E fa di clarità l'er tremare, and makes the air tremble with claritas, E fa di clarità l'er tremare, thus writ and conserved, or was in Verona. So we sat there by the arena outside, tea and El Decaduto, the lace cuff fallen over his knuckles, considering Rochefoucauld. But the program, Cafe Dante, a literary program, 1920 or thereabouts, was neither published nor followed. Griffith said years before that, can't move them with a cold thing like economics. I'm pledged not to come here, London, to Parliament. Aram vult nemus, as under the rain altars, asking how to discover delusions, confusions. Chose Cow Yao and the crooks disappeared. Chose Yi Yin and the crooks toddled off. 2 hours of living, knew when they left that there would be one hell of a fight in the Senate. Lodge knocks against world entanglement. 2 with him and the whole House against the constriction of Bacchus. Moved to repeal that goddamned amendment, number 17. Mr. Tinkham, Geneva, the usurer's dunghill. Frogs, Brits, with a few Dutch pimps as top dressing to profess extortions, and the usual filthiness. For details, see Odon's neat little volume. That is, for a few of the more obvious details, the root stench being usura and metathemenon. We've had that metathemenon before. That's changing the value of money. Changing the value of money sort of midstream, you could say, and along with usury, Pound thought that was the greatest crime because it hurt people and enriched the bankers. And Churchill's return to Midas, broadcast by his liaré, no longer necessary. Taxes are no longer necessary in the old way if money be based on work done inside a system and measured and gauged to human requirements inside the nation or system and canceled in proportion to what is used and worn out. That ideogram there, by the way, is Tao. That's the Tao of Tao Te Ching. That's the way of nature. That's, sort of the principle that is in Taoism, is in Confucianism, even in Zen. And it's just interesting that it's in here as part of Pound's view of economics, not to change the money, not to practice usury, but money should be based on work done inside the nation or system. That's the Tao. And canceled in proportion to what is used and worn out. A la Wurgel said one would have to think about that, but was hanged dead by the heels before his thought and proposito came into action efficiently. For a pig, Jepson said, for a woman, for the infamies of usura, the stealing of the mare, casus bellorum, mitts, sang Mr. Wilson, Thomas, not Woodrow, Harriet's spirited air, the honors twice with his boots on, that was Wellington. And if theft be the main motive in government, in a large way, there will certainly be minor purloinments. As long as the socialists use their accessories as red herring to keep man's mind off the creation of money, many men's manners, vide et urbes, he saw cities, polomites, that Greek there is polomites, a sort of term used by Homer for Odysseus. Videt et urbis, he saw cities. Odysseus, Seleuce, personage, Otis, so Nausicaa, took down the washing. Nausicaa, of course, the princess in the Odyssey who saves Odysseus after he's washed up on the shore from a shipwreck. So Nausicaa took down the washing, or at least went to see that the maids didn't slack, or sat by the window in Bagna Romagna, knowing that nothing could happen and looking ironically at the traveler. Cassandra, your eyes are like tigers. No light reaches through them. Eating lotus, or if not exactly the lotus, the asphodel. To be gentle Donna in a lost town in the mountains, on a balcony with an iron railing, with a servant behind her, as it might be in a play by Lope de Vega. And one goes by, not alone. No e amor sin celos, sin segreto, no e amor. So that's, and there is no love without jealousy, not any love without secrecy. Eyes of Doña Juana la Loca. Chiuniza's shade al triedro in the corner. And I think right now, just watch what happens here. This is really important. Chiuniza's shade al triedro, and that presage in the air, which means that nothing will happen that will be visible to the sergeants. I think we're having these tiger's eyes showing up. And as always, that's Pound's spirit animal. I find this line so amazing, that presage in the air, which means that nothing will happen that will be visible to the sergeants. There's some sort of vision happening here. There's something going on in the air that ordinary eyes can't see. Tre donne intorno alla mia mente, three women intorno alla mia mente, within my mind, or turning in my mind, three women turning in my mind, but as of conversation to follow. Boredom of that Roman on Olivia's stairs. In her vision, that stone angle, all of his scenery, with the balustrade, an Antipodes. And as for the solidity of the white oxen in all this, perhaps only Dr. Williams, Bill Carlos, will understand its importance, its benediction. He would have put in the cart. The shadow of the tent's peak treads on its corner peg, marking the hour. The moon split, no cloud nearer than Luca. In the spring and autumn, in the spring and autumn, there are no righteous wars. Why don't we come back to the full screen for a moment? So when I talk about, that surface texture in the cantos, to me, that's a canto I've often overlooked. There's something about starting out with these jokes working throughout it, and yet the cat's eyes, the tiger eyes of Cassandra, and in the end, a vision that he's seeing that none of the guards can see. I love the little vision that only William Carlos Williams, would understand the significance of that white bull on the road. He's looking out and he's seeing it, not just the significance, but the benediction. Really important word. Only Williams would understand that, there are blessings coming off of that bull out on the road. And then we move into, suddenly he sees the tent peg casting its shadow, and that's his sundial. I mean, if you can imagine living in a tent long enough under the sun that the tent peg is your sundial, and then he sees the moon, the cloud, and then he remembers the old Chinese text, the spring and autumn, or chronicles of the spring and autumn, which, by the way, is where that posthumous diary of Diane Prima gets her name too. You know, the whatever it's called, spring and autumn journals that came out just after Diane died. But then we end with, in the spring and autumn, there are no righteous wars. And again, you know, the sort of movement back, trying to keep on track with what his goal is there. You know, a book that will end the wars for all the fuck ups. Well, we've just seen the cats come along and things begin to go on that are invisible to the guards. So now we're going to, I think we'll just go straight into Canto 79, which is going to have a little lyric burst for the cats. Moon, cloud, tower. Look at the gap in there. You know, you're supposed to read this with a texture. Moon, cloud, tower, patch of the Batistero, all of the whiteness. Dirt piles purred the Del Cosa insect. Think not that you would gain if their least caress were faded from my mind. I had not loved thee half so well, loved I not womankind. So Salzburg reopens, lit a flame in my thought that the years, Amari Lee, Lee, and her hair gone white from the loss of him, and she not yet 30, on her wedding day, and then thus, for the next time, at the Spielhaus, might have been 2 years later, or Ostafieva inside the street doors of the Wigmore, and would not have known her, undoubtedly would have put in the cart. Look at this. He's going right back to the end of the last canto, you know, undoubtedly. But notice the move there. How many people writing their poems would discard that as a stray thought? But whatever mindset is going on here, this speculation, this would have put in the cart, William Carlos Williams would have put in the cart, comes back to Pound, which is so interesting because it means now he's put the cart twice into his poem. Undoubtedly would have put in the cart. President Mr. G. Scott whistling Lili Marlene with positively less musical talent than that of any other man of color whom I have ever encountered, but with bonhomie and good humor. To Girdle in memoriam, sleek head that saved me out of one chaos. And I hear that GP has salmoned through all of it. Où sont? And who will come to the surface? And Peyton not to be murdered. 14-13 after 6 hours discussion. Indubitably, R.E. Scott. I like a certain number of shades in my landscape, as per, don't tell no one I made you that table, or Whiteside. I certainly do like dogs. Are going to wash you? No, not to the author, to the canine unwilling in question. More of these jokes going on here. I mean, you know, there's a sort of movement up and down here. And now, if you remember that second canto of the peace song, which was Janikin's Song to the Birds, notice what's going to start to happen now. Pound's going to look out and he's going to see, with 8 birds on a wire, or rather on 3 wires, Mr. Allingham, the new Bechstein is electric, and the lark's squawk has passed out of season. Whereas the sight of a good nigger is cheering, the batons won't look you straight. Guard's cap Quattrocento passes a cavallo on horseback through landscape Cosimo Dura, or something del Cosa, upstream to Delouse, and downstream for the same purpose. Seaward, different lice live in different waters. Some minds take pleasure in counterpoint, and the later Beethoven on the new Bechstein, or on the Piazza San Marco, for example, finds a certain concordance of size, not in the concert hall. Can that be the papal major sweating it out to the bum drum? What castrum Romanum, what went into winter quarters, is under us, as the young horse whinnies against the tubas in contending for certain values. Giannican per Esampio, and Orazio Vecchi or Bronzino, Greek rascality versus Hagoromo. That's the name of a no play pound translated now 30 years earlier. Greek rascality against Hagoromo, Komosaka versus vulgarity. No sooner out of Troas than the damn fools attacked Ismarus of the Chicones. 4 birds on 3 wires, 1 bird on 1. The imprint of the intaglio depends in part on what is pressed under it. The mold must hold what is poured into it. In discourse, what matters is to get it across. E qua basta. This is again coming out of Confucius. In discourse, what matters is to get it across. E qua basta, and enough. Say what matters and stop there. 5 of them now on 2, on 3, 7 on 4. Thus, what's his name and the change in writing the songbooks? 5 on 3. O lentissima rosa fresca. So they have left the upper church at Assisi, but the Goncourt shed certain light on the French Revolution. Park your Jeep over there. The Bacon Rind banner, alias the Washington Arms, floats over against Ugolino in San Stefano dei Cavalieri. God bless the Constitution and save it, the value thereof. That is the crux of the matter. And goddamn the perverters. And if Attlee attempts a Ramsay, leave the Duke, go for the gold, in less than a geological epoch. And the fleet that triumphed at Salamis, and Wilkes's fixed the price per loaf. Justice, Athena could have done with more sex appeal. Saesia oculi, pardon me, owl, that word there means the owl, which is Athena's kind of spirit animal. Pardon me, owl, leave it, I'm not a fool. Ma, the price is 3 altars, multa. Park your Jeep over there. 2 on 2. What's the name of that bastard? D'Arezzo? Guy d'Arezzo. Notation. We have yellow bird rests. Notation. 3 on 3. Chiacerona, the yellow bird, to rest. 3 months in a bottle. Hector. The ideograms again, yellow bird rest. Notice in the English, the yellow bird to rest. By the 2 breasts of Tellus, bless my buttons, a staff car, si come avessa l'inferno in gran despito, one of the great quotes from Dante's Inferno, as if he held the Inferno in great disdain. Si come avesse l'inferno in gran despito, a staff car. You can see the officer in it with a look on his face as though he held hell in great disdain. Capaneus, with 6 on 3 swallowtails, as from the breasts of Helen, a cup of white gold, 2 cups for 3 altars, Tellus, Gaia, Fecunda, each one in the name of its god, mint, thyme, and basilicum. The young horse whinnies against the sound of the bum band, to that gadget, and to the production and the slaughter on both sides in memoriam. Hell, don't they get a break for the whistle? And if the court be not the center of learning, in short, the snot of pejorocracy. Paul, you probably recognize that pejorocracy, a big word in Olson's Maximus, probably lifted. I think this is a neologism on Pound's part. In short, the snot of pejorocracy. Tinsel gilded, a fat, fussy old woman and fat, snorty old stallions, half dead at the top. That's a line from William Butler Yeats describing the tower he lived in, half dead at the top, but it's a symbol for what he thought was wrong with Ireland. Half dead at the top. My dear William B. Y., your one half was too moderate. Pragmatic pig, if Goyim will serve for 2/3 of it. That line, pragmatic pig, is also from William Butler Yeats, the pragmatic pig of the world. To say nothing of the investment of funds in the you and me and similar ventures, small arms and chemicals, whereas Mr. Keith comes nearest to Donatello's. Oh, Lynx, my love, my lovely Lynx, keep watch over my wine pot. Guard close my mountain still, till the god comes into this whiskey. Manitou, god of lynxes, remember our corn. Cardus, god of camels, what the deuce are you doing here? I beg your pardon. Prepare to go on a journey. I prepare to go on a journey, or to count sheep in Phoenician. How is it far if you think of it? So they said to Lydia, no, your bodyguard is not the town executioner. The executioner is not here for the moment. The fellow who rides beside your coachman is just a Cossack who executes. Which being the case, her holding dear H.J., Mr. James, Henry, literally by the buttonhole, in those so consecrated surroundings, the garden in the temple, no less, and saying for once the right thing, namely, cher maître, to his checkered waistcoat, the Princess Bariatinsky, as the fishtail said to Odysseus. This is Greek means in Troy, as the fishtails or the sirens said to Odysseus. In Troy, the moon has a swollen cheek. And when the morning sun lit up the shelves and battalions of the West, cloud over cloud, old Ez folded his blankets. Neither Eos nor Hesperus has suffered wrong at my hands. O Lynx, wake Silenus and Casey, shake the castanets of the Bassarids. The mountain forest is full of light, the tree comb red gilded. Who sleeps in the field of lynxes, in the orchard of Melids, with great blue marble eyes, because he likes to, the Cossack. Salazar, Scott, Dolly on sick call, Polk, Tyler, half the presidents, and Calhoun. Retaliate on the capitalists, said Calhoun of the North. Ah, yes, when the ideas were clearer, debts to people in New York City, and on the hill of the Melids, and the close garden of Venus, asleep amid serried lynxes, set wreaths on Priapus, Iacchos, Iai, Kithera, Io, having root in the equities, Io, and you can make $5,000 a year. All you have to do is make one trip up country, then come back to Shanghai and send in an annual report as to the number of converts, Sweetland on sick call. That Greek means have mercy, eleison, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie have mercy, each under his fig tree. or with the smell of fig leaves burning. So should be fire in winter, with fig wood, with cedar and pine burrs. Oh, lynx, keep watch on my fire. So Astafjeva had conserved the tradition from Byzance, and before then, Manitou remembered this fire. Oh, lynx, keep the phylloxera from my grapevines. Iacchos, Iacchos, rejoice, Awe, eat of it not in the underworld. See that the sun or the moon bless thy eating. Kore, Kore, for the 6 seeds of an error. Or that the stars bless thy eating. O lynx, guard this orchard, keep from Demeter's furrow. This fruit has a fire within it. Pomona, Pomona, no glass is clearer than are the globes of this flame. What sea is clearer than the pomegranate body holding the flame? Pomona, Pomona, lynx, keep watch on this orchard that is named Melagrana, or the pomegranate field. The sea is not clearer in azure, nor the Heliad's brightening light. Here are lynxes, here are lynxes. Is there a sound in the forest of pard, or of basarid, or crotale, or of leaves moving? Kythera, here are lynxes. Will the scrub oak burst into flower? There's a rose vine in this underbrush. Red, white, no, but a color between them. When the pomegranate is open and the light falls half through it. Lynx, beware of these vine thorns. O lynx, glaucolas with gleaming eyes coming up from the olive yards. Cuthera, here are lynxes and the clicking of crotales. There is a stir of dust from old leaves. Will you trade roses for acorns? Will lynxes eat thorn leaves? What have you in that wine jar? Ichor, for lynxes? Malid and Bassarid among lynxes. How many? There are more under the oak trees. We're here waiting the sunrise and the next sunrise for 3 nights amid lynxes, for 3 nights of the oak wood, and the vines are thick in their branches. No vine lacking flower, no lynx lacking a flower rope, no malid minus a wine jar. This forest is named Melagrana. Oh, lynx, keep the edge on my cider. Keep it clear without cloud. We have lain here amid calacanthus and swordflower. The haliads are caught in wild rose vine. The smell of pine mingles with rose leaves. Oh, lynx, be many, of spotted fur and sharp ears. Oh, lynx, have your eyes gone yellow? The spotted fur and sharp ears. Therein is the dance of the Basarids, therein are centaurs, and now Priapus with Faunus. The graces have brought Aphrodite. Her cell is drawn by 10 leopards. O lynx, guard my vineyard, as the grape swells under vine leaf. Helios has come to our mountain. There is a red glow in the carpet of pine spikes. O lynx, guard my vineyard, as the grape swells under vine leaf. This goddess was born of sea foam. She is lighter than air under Hesperus. And the Greek means, you are fearful, Kythera, terrible in resistance. Cyprus, Aphrodite, a petal lighter than sea foam. Cuthera, Aram, Nemus, vault, the grove needs an altar. O Puma, sacred to Hermes, Symbika, servant of Helios. So we come back full screen for a moment.
So this is a different cat, different kind of cat.
I think this is what's going on in his tent and the guards can't see it. Remember he said
Although-
things in
It's
the
also
air that's happening.
It's also reminiscent of that Canto 2 with the
Yeah,
Dionysus turning uh, the shipment into lynxes everywhere. Like
exactly. Yeah,
everything is becoming the lynx that's bringing Aphrodite.
exactly. And Dionysus is leaning over the sort of railing of the ship and saying to the captain standing next to him, "My cats. These are my cats, my vineyards." And I think this is where Pound is really, he's speaking of his own religion. He's talking about, they brought their gods into Latium, which is, of course, the Roman world. Pound is bringing his own gods now into the detention center. And I think it's just a sort of remarkable movement that he's going through here, where um, I've read some critics who don't think that this is a particularly, they don't like this section. They think that it's contrived. But I don't really think it's contrived. I think it's, however you want to say it. Pound is exerting his like lyric abilities here, and he's making a prayer, and most prayers are contrived. There's maybe a difference with this one, which is that Pound keeps opening his mind up. This is a prayer that's coming on the heel of the white bull on the road with its benediction that only William Carlos Williams would have recognized. But Dr. Williams would have put the cart in too. And then suddenly these cats, it is like Canto 2 men. The cats are appearing out of nowhere. And Pound is beseeching them, bless my cider, keep an edge on my cider. Don't let the phylloxera get to my grapes. And it's a vision of Aphrodite and it's a vision of Persephone. And it's the sort of orchards of pomegranates. I think this is his, like sacred ground in a way, and it's all inside. It's when he says 3 women inside my mind. We could start to count them, but it's like Demeter and Persephone and Aphrodite, and they're all sort of showing up for him here. The other thoughts, anybody? Thought maybe what we do is let's go to page 533. We're going to skip about 10 pages here of Canto 80 and go into an interesting thing that happens at the end of Canto 80. Yeah, there it is. Here we are, top of this page. Oh, yeah, good. I'm not going to say much about this, except we'll just kind of go into it and then I'll gloss just a little bit. That from the gates of death, Whitman or Lovelace found on the Joe House seat at that in a cheap edition, and thanks to Professor Spear. So Pound has now found this anthology of English poetry in the Joe House. It's slowly being ripped apart by the inmates using it for toilet paper. But this is one access to poetry. This is, other than his Confucius, this is the only book that he gets here in the death camp. And, there's a macabre humor, a black humor going on here that I think is sort of interesting. But watch what he does once he has access to this book. That from the gates of death, Whitman or Lovelace found on the Joe House seat at that in a cheap edition, and thanks to Professor Spear, hast thou swum in a sea of airstrip through an eon of nothingness when the raft broke and the waters went over me? That's him immediately becoming, just for an instant Odysseus. Hast thou swum in a sea of airstrip through an eon of nothing when the raft broke? Odysseus's raft broke and the waters went over me. Immaculata in Troibo, for those who drink of the bitterness. Perpetua,
pronouncenames.com.
Agata, Anastasia, Secularum, repos dene asils senza termine funge immaculata regina, les larmes qui j'ai créées m'inondent, tard trésor je t'ai connu la tristessa. I have been hard as youth, 60 years. That was all quoted from Villon. And now, if calm be after tempest, remember we just saw Odysseus go down in the tempest on his raft before being rescued by Nausicaa. If calm be after tempest, that the ants seem to wobble as the morning sun catches their shadows. Nadowski, Dewitt, McAllister. Also Comfort KP, special mention, on sick call Penrieth, Turner, Toth, Hieri, no fortune, and with a name to come. Bankers, Seitz, Hildebrand, and Cornelison, Armstrong, special mention KP. This is just the roll call happening out in the detention camp. White, Gratia, Bedell, Gratia, Wiseman, not William, Africanus, with a smoky torch through the unending labyrinth of the souterrain, the underground. Or remembering Carlton, let him celebrate Christ in the grain. And if the corn cat be beaten, there's that corn cat again. If the corn cat be beaten, Demeter has lain in my furrow. This wind is lighter than swan's down. The day moves not at all. Zup, Buford, and Bohan, men of no fortune and with a name to come. His helmet is used for a piss pot. This helmet is used for my foot bath. Elpenor can count the shingle under Zoagli. Pepitone was wasting toothwash as I lay by the drain hole. The guard's opinion is lower than that of the prisoners. OTA of the army. And now look what he's doing suddenly with his book of English verse. Oh, to be in England now that Winston's out. Now that there's room for doubt, and the bank may be the nation's, and the long years of patience and labor's vacillations may have let the bacon come home. To watch how they'll slip and slide, watch how they'll try to hide the real portent, to watch a while from the tower where dead flies lie thick over the old charter, forgotten, oh, quite forgotten, but confirming John's first one, and still there if you climb over attic rafters to look at the fields. Are they tilled? Is the old terrace alive as it might be, with a whole colony if money be free again? Chesterton's England has been, and why not? Or is it all rust, ruin, death duties, and mortgages, and the great carriage yard empty, and more pictures gone to pay taxes? When a dog is tall, but not so tall as all that, that dog is a tall butt. A bit long in the pasterns. When a butt is half as tall as a whole butt, that butt is a small butt, let back and side go bare. And the old kitchen left as the monks had left it, and the rest as time has cleft it. Only shadows enter my tent as men pass between me and the sunset, beyond the eastern barbed wire. A sow with 9 bonine, matronly as any duchess at Claridge's. And for that Christmas at Maury Hewlett's, going out from Southampton, they passed the car by the dozen who would not have shown weight on a scale, riding for Noel, the green holly, Noel, Noel, the green holly, a dark night for the green holly. That would have been Salisbury Plain, and I have not thought of the Lady Anne for this 12 years, nor of Le Portel, how tiny the paneled room where they stabbed him in her lap. almost la stuarda. Si tui di dole blan and mariman for the leopards and broom plants. Tudor indeed is gone in every rose, blood red, blanch white that in the sunset glows, cries blood, blood, blood against the Gothic stone of England, as the Howard or Boleyn knows, nor seeks the carmine petal to infer, nor is the white bud time's inquisitor, probing to know if its new gnarled root twists from York's head or belly of Lancaster, or if a rational soul should stir, perchance, within the stem or summer shoot to advance, contrition's utmost throw, seeking in thee but oblivion, not thy forgiveness, France. As the young lizard extends his leopard spots along the grass blades, seeking the green midge, half an ant size, and the serpentine will look just the same, and the gulls be as neat on the pond, and the sunken garden unchanged. And God knows what else is left of our London, my London, your London. And if her green elegance remains on this side of my rain ditch, puss lizard will lunch on some other T-bone. Sunset, grand couturier. Come back to full screen, Paul. Notice him plucking out all those old rhyme schemes from his anthology and singing a little dirge to England, the history of England, the war history of England, the blood red, Blanche White, going all the way back to that early canto where the one scarlet petal cast on the Blanche White stone. Here we've had Tudor indeed is gone, and every rose, blood red, Blanche White, that in the sunset glows, cries blood, blood, blood against the Gothic stone of England, as the Howard or Boleyn knows. And we have this sort of history of England being repeated in a history of the rhyme schemes that he is pulling out of this old anthology. And then it's just cut off as he looks down into the grass and he sees what he calls a young lizard with leopard spots, and then calls it puss lizard, that's stalking a little green midge, half an ant size. He's down in the grass again. And as he looks at it, he suddenly sees London again, with that, I think, extraordinary lines. And the serpentine will look just the same, and the gulls be as neat on the pond, and the sunken garden unchanged, and God knows what else is left of our London, my London, your London. And he's probably now reading news of what's going on in London with a blitzkrieg of the Nazis and the destruction of the city that was his young, his youthful city of coming into poetry. And then he goes back to the lizard. And if her green elegance remains on this side of my rain ditch, puss lizard will lunch on some other T-bone. And then he suddenly looks up, sunset grand couturier, perfect little imagist end that ends the poem or the canto and sort of ends the little progression we've had of British history and history of poetic rhyme schemes with a little moment of imagist looking at the sunset and the beauty of the sunset. And you can't help but, link the sunset to the destruction of London. So anyhow, some remarkable moves that he makes there in that particular canto. Can a poet consciously make that multiple tone happen, or is that the way your mind has to work to write that way? I don't know. I suspect it's both. I mean, I think, 60 years of trying out all sorts of rhyme schemes left him with the skills to be able to do that kind of thing. But the moving back and forth of his mind and his ability just to, move out of what may simply be an exercise in poetic dexterity becomes an exercise in imagist precision, becomes a weeping thought of the city of his youth, and goes back to the imagist precision of seeing the lizard on his side of the rain ditch and the little midge on the other side. And then, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how this was done, but it, again, just the surface texture and the multiple things that are going on here just, always astonish me.
I really get a sense that we're following his mind in this cantos.
Very much, yeah, very much. Yeah, and I think these are why, so many people found, as I said before, these I think are the cantos that really brought him to attention of the whole new generation of poets. This was published in 48. So the Ezra Pound that everybody from De Prima and Ginsberg to Snyder and Duncan were really getting onto, this was the pound that they first, came to and just felt like this was nothing they had ever seen before. Well, maybe we should then go into one more canto here, which is probably the most famous of all the cantos, multiply anthologized and cited, and has been a site of great controversy and what to make of it. So this is Canto 81, Paul, page 537. It's going to be about 5 pages, 4.5 pages, 5.5 pages. So we'll look at this. Canto 81. And remember, Ceres here in this first line may be another word for Demeter. Ceres is technically the god of grain, but when he's had, the cat in his cornfields, this is Ceres again, Demeter again, Aphrodite, all these goddesses coming together for him. Zeus lies in Ceres' bosom. Typhon is attended of loves under Cuthera before sunrise. And he said, aquí mucho catolicismo, sounded catolicismo, y muy poco religión. And he said, yo creo que los reyes desaparecen, kings will, I think, disappear. That was Padre Jose Elizondo in 1906 and in 1917, or about 1917. And Dolores said, come pan, Nino, eat bread, me lad. Sargent had painted her before he descended, i.e., if he descended. But in those days, he did thumb sketches, impressions of the Velázquez in the Museo del Prado, and books cost a peseta, brass candlesticks in proportion. Hot wind came from the marshes, and death chill from the mountains. And later Bowers wrote, but such hatred, I had never conceived such. And the London Reds wouldn't show up as friends, i.e. friends of Franco working in London. And in Alcazar, 40 years gone, they said, go back to the station to eat. You can sleep here for a peseta. Goat bells tinkled all night, and the hostess grinned, eso es luto, ha! Mi marido es muerto. It is mourning. My husband is dead. And she gave me paper to write on, with a black border 1/2 inch or more deep, say 5/8 of the locanda. We call all foreigners Frenchies. And the egg broke in Cabrera's pocket, thus making history. Basil says they beat drums for 3 days. till all the drumheads were busted. Simple village fiesta. And as for his life in the Canaries, Possum observed the local Portuguese folk dances was danced by the same dancers in diverse localities in political welcome, the technique of demonstration. Cole studied that, not GDH Horace. You'll find, said old Andre Spear, that every man on that board, Credit Agricole, has a brother-in-law. You the one, I the few, said John Adams, speaking of fears in the abstract to his volatile friend, Mr. Jefferson. Um, this is sort of an argument between John Adams and Mr. Jefferson. I think it's one we're still having today. Jefferson was afraid of the one, the monarchy. He wanted complete democracy. John Adams was afraid of the few, a kind of oligarchy or power in a junta. You the one, I the few, said John Adams, speaking of fears in the abstract to his volatile friend, Mr. Jefferson. To break the pentameter, that was the first heave. This is Pound remembering again his days in London. That was the first thing they had to do, was to break the pentameter. That was the first heave. Or as Joe Bard says, they never speak to each other. If it is a baker and concierge visibly, it is La Rochefoucauld and de Maintenon audibly. Te Cavero, La Budella, La Corata, Ate. In less than a geological epoch, said Henry Mencken. Some cook, some do not cook. Some things cannot be altered. What counts as the cultural level? Thank Benin for this table, packing box. Don't you tell no one I made it. From a mask fine as any in Frankfurt, it'll get you off on the ground. Again, this repeated, don't you tell no one I made it, this table that has been made for Pound by one of the inmates. It'll get you off on the ground. And now look at what happens. Light as the branch of guano. And at first disappointed with shoddy, the bare ramshackle K's, but then saw the high buggy wheels and was reconciled. George Santayana arriving in the port of Boston, and kept to the end of his life that faint, that dare of the Spaniard as a grace quasi imperceptible, as did Mus the V for you of Romagna, and said the grief was a full act repeated for each new condolorous, working up to a climax. And George Horace said he would get Beveridge, Senator. Beveridge wouldn't talk and he wouldn't write for the papers, but George got him by camping in his hotel and assailing him at lunch, breakfast, and dinner, 3 articles. And my old man went on hoeing corn while George was a-telling him, come across the vacant lot where you'd occasionally see a wild rabbit, or maybe only a loose one. Ah, oi, a leaf in the current at my great snow Althea. Stop there a moment. That's a line echoing off of Richard Lovelace's To Althea from Prison, which was probably in that book that Pound rescued from the Joe House, a Richard Lovelace poem in which his girlfriend Althea comes and delivers food to him through the grates. In those days in London, if you were in jail, it was up to your relatives to come feed you. Ezra Pound is just thinking, a leaf in the current at my grates, no Althea. Libretto. Yet, ere the season died a cold, borne upon a zephyr's shoulder, I rose through the aureate sky. Laws and Jenkins guard thy rest. Dolmetsch ever be thy guest. Has he tempered the viol's wood to enforth both the grave and the acute? Has he curved us the bowl of the lute? Laws and Jenkins guard thy rest. Dolmetsch ever be thy guest. Hast thou fashioned so airy a mood to draw up leaf from the root? Hast thou found a cloud so light as seem neither mist nor shade? And resolve me Tell me aright if Waller sang or Dowland played. Your eyen too will slay me suddenly. I may the beauty of him not sustain. And for 180 years, almost nothing. Ed ascoltando a leggier murmurio, and listening to the gentle murmur, there came new subtlety of eyes into my tent, whether of spirit or hypostasis. But what the blindfold hides, or at carnival, nor any pair showed anger, saw but the eyes and stance between the eyes, color, diastasis, careless or unaware, it had not the whole tense room, nor was place for the full idolus interpass, penetrate, casting but shade beyond the other lights. Skies clear, nights clear, green of the mountain pool shone from the unmasked eyes and half-masked space. What thou lovest well remains. The rest is dross. What thou lovest well shall not be reft from thee. What thou lovest well is thy true heritage. Whose world, or mine, or theirs? Or is it of none? First came the seen, then thus the palpable Elysium, though it were in the halls of hell. What thou lovest well is thy true heritage. What thou lovest well shall not be reft from thee. The ant's a centaur in his dragon world. Pull down thy vanity. It is not man made courage, or made order, or made grace. Pull down thy vanity, I say, pull down. Learn of the green world what can be thy place in scaled invention or true artistry. Pull down thy vanity. Paquin, pull down. The green cask has outdone your elegance. Master thyself, then others shall thee bear. Pull down thy vanity. Thou art a beaten dog beneath the hail, a swollen magpie in a fitful sun, half black, half white, nor know'st thou wing from tail. Pull down thy vanity. How mean thy hates, fostered in falsity. Pull down thy vanity, wrathed to destroy, niggard in charity. Pull down thy vanity, I say, pull down. But to have done instead of not doing, this is not vanity. To have with decency knocked that a blunt should open. To have gathered from the air a live tradition, or from a fine old eye the unconquered flame. This is not vanity. Here error is all in the not done, all in the diffidence that faltered. Let's come back, Paul. How to read that? Ezra Pound, apologists think that's his great act of contrition. Other people think he is contrite and tells himself to pull down his vanity, and then turns on a dime at the end and decides that maybe his life hasn't all been vanity. I mean, I think it comes with these eyes that somehow appear to him in the tent. He sees these eyes, and not a one of them seems to be judging him. You know, every one of those eyes seems to, in some way, be looking at him. He calls them the unmasked eyes and half-masked space. And that's the moment that he hears what thou lovest well remains. So there's some sort of vision going on there that leads him into that, probably, of all the piece on Cantos, those couple of pages, pull down thy vanity, the most anthologized, the most notable. And yet, talk about moments you can't just pull out and stick in an anthology. Those things don't, those lines really mean something when you've stuck with this for 500 pages and followed him into the death camps and watched this, sort of public act, or let's say poetic act of remorse, contrition.
I sort of read it the oppositely, though. It seems like he's saying that diffidence is vanity and to not continue to produce is the error, which
that's
is
where
more in alignment with vanity, because vanity is about being seen in a certain light of goodness, like to be virtuous according to some kind of social spectrum that he's not really on any longer now that he's in prison and needing very badly to complete his, I'm sorry if my Zoom is weird, opus against war.
Yeah, that's where people, say it seems like he recants his contrition right at the end. But it's interesting, he has a memory. There's actually a photograph of him and a group of friends who went and looked up this guy named Blunt. I think Edmund Blunt was his name, who they thought was a great writer who was completely unrecognized. And in England, they went and looked him up. And so that may be where he's remembering back again, so that he ends to have with decency knocked, that a Blunt should open, to have gathered from the air a live tradition, or from a fine old eye the unconquered flame. This is not vanity. Here error is all in the not done. But again, you see his mind turning and the shift there. Here error is all in the not done, all in the diffidence that faltered. That's sort of a remarkable set of turns here. He has this vision of the eyes coming in, but none of them are judging him particularly. And yet it's what immediately, it's almost as though the eyes give him this lyric: what thou lovest well shall remain. What thou lovest well is thy true heritage. And I read these as like two states of mind almost at war with each other. He's comforting himself that they can't take away from me what I've loved. And then he's also thinking of himself as a dog beaten down by the hail, or a magpie swollen in the sun, half black, half white. And in a way, it's his own conscience that is saying, pull down thy vanity, pull down thy vanity. And then it turns right at the end again, almost as though he's answering the eyes now, and he's just trying to defend himself and saying, it wasn't vanity to have knocked with decency that old man Blunt answered, and we went and paid him our respects. And, then that line, which I particularly find a lot of meaning in, to have gathered from the air a live tradition, as a sort of nice balance against, to have thrown off the pentameter. That was the first heave. But to go back and gather a live tradition, which I think he's there probably thinking of, the troubadour work he did and the friends that he helped and supported. I think he's in a very, back and forth state of mind here. And there's not any one answer to what's his state of mind or what's he saying here.
It seems that he does pull down his vanity in that situation and is befriended by the other prisoners, by the guards. There's some kind of, by him not being the great almighty 9-languaged wise man, now in this small cage, he has pulled down his vanity to be one with everyone.
That's a nice comment. Yeah, thank you. I'm aware that next week is our last meeting, and I'd like to read the last 2 of these Pisan cantos and get a feel for how it ends up there. And then probably maybe an intermediary canto, and then we can, as a group, read together the final drafts and fragments to get a feel for the real contrition at the end of his life. Yeah, to throw off the pentameter preempts Olson. To throw off globalism would have been complicated. I
Well,
wonder, yeah.
Isn't he saying with the pentameter to throw off the imperialism of England?
I think both, yeah, I think so. And I think that's one of the remarkable things about his lyric about gone is Tudor, you know, and sort of the rehearsal of English history, you know, it's both throwing off the monarchy, throwing off old England, throwing off the pentameter. And I always remember a talk Kamau Brathwaite gave where he talked about his work as a Barbados poet to throw up the pentameter. And he was remembering as a child the British troops marching through the town that he was in. And he said every time he hears the pentameter, it's just troops marching. And so, you know, real imperialism there. Yeah.
I'm reading the Michael McClure edition of the Cantos, and there aren't a lot of his notes in here. There are a lot on Canto 36. But on this canto, there's just a line by then a question mark. Pull down thy vanity, how mean thy hates fostered in falsity. Pull down thy vanity, wraith to destroy, niggard in charity. Pull down thy vanity, I say pull down. And I have heard Michael use pull down thy vanity, I say pull down, even in conversation. So much as I thought that since I never saw him pull this book down off the shelf, I didn't think that Pound was such a big part of McClure, but it is. And in the very beginning of the book, he has RD 1 and 2, 39, 79, 36. So I think he read those with Robert Duncan, whether in a class he had with Duncan or in friendship in one of their soirees. I don't know. It's kind of interesting to be reading Cantos, listening to Andrew, and then occasionally McClure will pop up with his handwriting with a note.
And Michael would have been studying with Duncan in 1954 or something like that, when this would still be very fresh, 53, 54, right, Amy?
Yeah. 53, 54. Yeah, that sounds right.
And I've been reading Bug House, which gives just a lot of different, it's very different. And sometimes the author, Daniel Smith, makes conclusions that I might question, but I find it fascinating to happen what happens to him after he is taken there, given his green crayon, and you know, and survived again, confined. I didn't like 2 years ago. I didn't like Pound.
A lot of people don't like Pound.
Oh my God, what have I done? I've made somebody like Pound.
I do. I'm sort of obsessed. Thank you for helping me with that, Andrew. And Paul.
Well, as you all know, I work at a place that was founded by a guy named Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who is a problematic figure. And I think Pound is one of the first people who really helped me realize that, you know, you got to accept some of these people. They're like your grandfather. You can't stand their opinions, their beliefs. You disagree with them on everything. They're still your grandfather. You know, and so I think of that like, you know, Pound is a major figure for me that way. There, you know, you just have to like, or I have to like him, even though I think his politics are loathsome. I think, you know, they're, you know, I may not have gotten along with him in person, but you know, there's valuable things, and that gathering from the air alive tradition is really what I take, you know, in a way that whole book is about. He really, you know, that book does it in a way, similarly to what, you know, I like to think Rothenberg did with, you know, America Prophecy. You know, he gathered a live tradition and put it into a book.
I can't wait to read it.
Well, Pound
No,
must have
actually,
had,
I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I'll let you say
Sure.
something with Diana. I just want to say I wouldn't necessarily advocate now somebody picking up America Prophecy, and because it was a book that traced things to 73. Just to give you an idea, the last 17 poems in it are by men. I'm sorry, one out of the last 17 is a woman. Like, can you imagine publishing an anthology now in which of your final 17 poems, only one is by a woman? I mean, it just, you know, so there's like a blinkered part, you know, there's a blinkered aspect to that book. Knowing that if you want to read it, great, but I think it's a book that could well be redone from the perspective of now and not, you know, the assumptions of 73, which shows Rothenberg's, you know, own blind side at the time, or one of many probably, but you know, yeah, go on, Diana. You were going to say something. Sorry to interrupt.
well, it struck me over and over when I wouldn't say that I've come to like Pound, but I would say that my respect for who he was and what he tried to do has like really, I mean, I've matured in my opinion of him, I guess, because, you know, he must have had great charm. I mean, he was liked in the prison camp. All these people went to see him. And when I think about how the cantos go, his personality must have been like that too, where he had this ranting side where he thought he was somehow the only person who could see the really truthful big picture, and not knowing that at that point that all big pictures are deeply flawed and missing a lot of stuff. So but given what he was trying to do, it's understandable. And then there's this side of him that the way that he talked to people and how generous he was with his influence and all of that. I've been not reading so much as skimming the Kenner book, and he has two paragraphs in there, one that talks about his Pound's huge he makes the world he was convinced had once known the order it now lacked, and what has been known should not be difficult to recover, a simple matter of reactivating knowledge. And I'm like, oh my God, that is just so much what a 25-year-old thinks. And then it says his second impulse, past writing, never really disjunct from the poetic, was always to teach, to share, and that impulse, like the poetic, entailed a problem of role. And then it talked about what a generous teacher he was.
And some people didn't like it at all. Gertrude Stein says in, you know, her autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, she says, Ezra Pound is a village crier, which is great if you're a village, but if not, not.
Well, she is a very powerful woman.
Yes, yes.
It was like they probably could have a nice verbal disagreement.
Yeah. Well, maybe we will end here then and meet next week, and we'll read these last two pieces on cantos, maybe an intermediary one, because there's some really beautiful work in both Rock Drill and Thrones, the two books that he wrote in the Bug House. But I think also finishing up by reading those final drafts and fragments is also a really feels like a closure in a way, and then everyone can go back and fill in what they want if you feel called to it, and keep at it. I'm hoping that what I've been able to do here is give you the just some perspectives and tools you need to continue reading this if it compels you.